So joining us today is Karol Dillon. He's a PhD researcher and is one of the leading voices in Gaelic football now when it comes to understanding two-sided players and developing two-sided players and how that can impact foot dominance, hand dominance can impact performance as well on the field. Karol, thanks a million for coming on today.
All good. Thank you very much for having me.
No
Yeah.
worries. So, like to kick things off, it might sound a bit complicated to some people, but
Mm.
can you explain the whole idea of laterality in Gaelic football and maybe some of the research that you've done into this topic?
Yeah. Well, I suppose laterality would normally be it's your limb dominance and your favorite limb or your dominant limb for each skill. And I think that needs at the outset needs to be specified because people can make assumptions, and we'll cover this as we continue, but people make assumptions that laterality um, it just covers all skills, that if you're left for your kick, left-sided free kick pass, you're left-sided for the solo, the hop, the hand pass, the pick up and shooting. And in no way, shape, or form should people think that that's the case. It's
Mm,
in many cases it's very much skill dependent. So laterality really would be the favorite, the study of your dominant limb across skills, and within that, then of course the golden the golden egg is the pursuit of bilaterality within each of these skills, and I think that's why it's so fascinating. Previously, the study of laterality would have been focused on soccer, FIFA World Cup '98, follow on from that in '08, NBA basketballers, um, Eastern European basketballers, but the first of its kind in Gaelic football, the study of
mm,
it, how prevalent bilaterality is, and certainly the idiosyncrasies within that.
mm.
Because, as you know, the more you find out about it, the more you realize how little we know about it, and that's the more I found out. I probably am a bit cloudier in some areas now, 4 or 5 years later, than I would have been at the very start. So
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, no, that's kind of that would be my short introduction, long introduction, but the shortest I can make it. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting. We'll definitely. I'm looking forward to digging into some of the findings that you had because I
Mm.
think people will find it surprising. But just to give your own background, like you're
Yeah,
you're obviously a Kerry man. Can you go
yeah.
into a bit of detail on where you're from in Kerry? Did you play much football growing up?
Yeah, there's no limits. So I would have played with the Kennellys, good lads.
Mm,
Um, I would have been, I mean, reasonable, certainly not county standard. And then I was a primary school teacher. Primary school teacher did for 10 years. I would have been fully left-sided myself. And I would have been fairly aware of that, though, that I was
mm,
left-handed, left-footed. And I would have also been aware that there was other players on the team that were left-sided. Even at a young age, I would have been aware that this is quite different to other teams. And it would just look at the draw, like, the fact that there were so
okay.
many left-sided players on the one team. And
Okay.
there obviously was no purposeful reason for that, just the way it fell. But I would have been aware. Then I was primary school teaching, and went back to, and I would advise, separate to this study, I would advise anyone who's looking to get into coaching at senior level. I do think they need to cut their teeth at juvenile level and with children. There, it's such a fantastic learning opportunity to try new things and see how they are just sponges. But two things I suppose leapt out at me very, very quickly. The best male and female boys or Gaelic footballers at 10, 11, 12 were the players who were doing athletics with their local
Mm.
athletics club on a Saturday morning, regardless of the standard, and the players that were more two-sided. It's all relative now, but were somewhat more two-sided than their peers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously that was coming from home. That's coming from a little bit towards from me at school. It's a myriad of reasons which we get into, but that was another thing that would have really struck a chord and
Yeah.
developing my interest in this.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's something I always say. If I do have kids, I definitely put
Mm.
them into athletics first
Oh,
because you can just see how they move. Like it's just running technique.
Yeah.
Everything really comes from that. Like, but just learning
Yeah.
that when you're young, everything else will
Oh.
come a lot easier. But I'm interested. So, like, what sparked your interest then? You just kind of noticed then at a young age, our
Mm.
team we've a lot of left footers, and then it was
Mm.
just something that was always in your head, and that kind of continued then throughout your life.
Yeah, so it's always the back of my mind. But I mean, you notice players. I mean, you grew up in Kerry, you notice Morris Spitz is
Yeah,
insanely two-sided. I mean, as he's kicking frees off the ground with his non-dominant foot, which I think is just a ridiculous. You see Shane Walsh doing it. I just think
yeah,
it's a ridiculously tough skill. Whatever about kicking off your hand with a non-dominant foot. So yeah, I would have been acutely aware of that as well. And so yeah, it definitely wasn't one thing. It was a myriad of things that were building up and
mm,
stoking my interest in this. And then after, I suppose, 10 years teaching, I went back full time as a student to the MSc in sports performance in UL. And then there was one key moment, the thesis titles were allocated because we'd be kind of used as an instrument of our supervisors or as lecturers to research certain topics for them, which is only right. And the thesis title came out, I remember, in March 2020, and the study of bilaterality in
right,
intercounty footballers with Phil Carney. So he's been with me from that day till this. So that was originally excuse me, that was originally a master's thesis, which then morphed into the PhD.
yeah.
So that was again, I can't say it was one thing, but it was just constant stoking the interest of this particular topic.
And just to get into some of the findings, like
Mm,
for me, the big thing that jumped out, and I
mm,
think it's something you mentioned in an interview, was that you would be so surprised. You would think elite players playing Division
mm,
One football,
mm,
intercounty, they're still predominantly, I think you mentioned
mm.
80, 90% are still very one-sided. And people would think to play county football, you do
Yeah.
need to use both. But for me, that was the biggest takeaway for you. Like, what were the big ones that jumped out
Well,
for you?
the master's thesis really was set in place why we had to conduct the first phase of the PhD was it was a qualitative piece, the master's, where we interviewed 15 intercounty. They either had to have played formerly Division One or were currently playing Division One intercounty, and five managers who had been at the same level. And all bar one said you couldn't be an intercounty footballer unless you were two-sided. That was essentially
Yeah,
one person, all right, and I can't say obviously,
yeah,
said you do well to find any player who's truly two-sided. And so, I mean, at that point, who am I to say that the players are wrong? I'm not going to turn around and say your experiences are incorrect or invalid. But it was the obvious follow-on. So what we did then, obviously, was the quoted 120 male and female games. I'll never forget it. Uh, 6 months of work. I mean, that's what
yeah.
was
Jeez.
it's about 49,000 actions, and you're talking hundreds of hours of coding here. And like the one thing I'd say is like this isn't my opinion. It's the joys, I suppose, of quantitative work is that it's facts. Um, each skill is coded: dominant, non-dominant, success, unsuccessful, and opposition proximity, yes, no.
Mm,
Um, So yeah, so that's the context of it. And then yeah, it was very clear. It was clear very very quickly. These guys, regardless of the division, because all divisions were quoted in both the male and female game, it was very quickly apparent how unilateral, i.e., one-sided,
mm.
players at all levels were and are across all skills.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that was the thing. And then I suppose, sorry, go on. I suppose we get to the other
No,
stuff.
no, you can keep going.
Yeah, no, so you're looking at it in terms of maybe that's just one team, that's just one game, that's just one division. Maybe you're looking for excuses, for want of a better word, but no. Uh, there was maybe one outlier. An outlier is probably even strong because I don't even think it was statistically different. To double check, but shooting at Division One level, um, were possibly those players were possibly more two sided. The shooters,
Okay.
possibly, but we're talking relative terms here, like. We're talking relative. The reality is, um, the mean would be across all skills for the male and female footballers, whereas you're talking 80 to 85% dominant
Mm.
side use.
And another interesting thing that came up for me was you always noticed it, and you
Mm,
might notice it when you were playing with an underage team that had a lot of left
mm,
footers, but
yeah.
you'll hear the shouts from the sideline, he's all left, he's all
Yeah.
left, maybe because he stands out, but they're actually the players who are less one-sided than the right-footed players.
Yeah, no, I would have had that perception. Um, I certainly would have. But this, our analysis, not just visual, but statistical analysis, would have shown, um, across all skills and across the male and female game, that those players were actually more two-sided. And
Mm,
um, there are two possible reasons. We can just, again, we go back to how research into laterality is in its infancy, but there are two possible reasons we feel for this. The right hand world hypothesis, whereby the world is made up for aimed towards right-handed people. So that would be your scissors, it could be your computer mouse. Then, in practical terms, it could be your drill in the Gaelic football pitch. I'll guarantee you that when that drill has been explained for the first time, it's been set up for the right-footed players on the team.
mm,
It's over on that side, and obviously that left-footed player has to adapt. And then the other reason, which is fascinating to me, is the essentially the wiring of the brain. Um, there is a lot of research to say that the wiring of the brain, the corpus callosum, which is the bridge of the two hemispheres, there would be a lot of research to say that the corpus callosum in left-sided players is thicker, which means it can hold more neural axons, and which means that the transmission of messaging is more efficient in those players, which
mm.
means that the transmission of messaging between two hemispheres from the dominant to the non-dominant, etc., is more efficient and faster, and that is the key.
Yeah. So is like now I wouldn't have a huge amount of knowledge on this, but say we're predominantly the left side of your brain will kind of dictate the right side of your body,
Mm,
and they say the right side of your brain is maybe
mm,
more creative, more artistic, and
mm,
that will be dictating more, the players who are left foot. Like this is just kind of when I off the top of my head, if I tell you some of the best players I'd love to watch, they would
mm,
have been like Kieran MacDonald, Marty
yeah,
Clark, the Gooch, guys like this who
yeah,
really creative forwards but left-footed players. So
yeah.
is there something in that where the more creative player, more
Yeah, I'd be
left-footed?
I'd be loath to get into the creative aspect of it, but what I can
Yeah.
say is because it is simply not an area we've gone down, but and it is an area I'd like to go down. But what we can say is that it's the cross-lateral players in particular, whereby the left-footed, right-handed, um, in some ways that might be the perfect mix. Now,
Mm,
the research again is in its infancy in this. I'm a lot more solid ground as regards to corpus callosum, but the right hemisphere controlling the left foot. Right hemisphere tends to control visuospatial. Left hemisphere controlling the right hand tends to control short sequential actions. So if you
mm,
think about left foot kicking, right hand passing and hopping. But again, that would be. I think you'd need fMRI studies to delve deeper into that. But
mm.
I think that if you go back to the cross lateral stuff, um, from a practical level, when they're children, and this goes to the coaching aspect as well, is that it's a big ask to ask a child to feed the ball with their non-dominant hand to their non-dominant foot. So you have two non-dominant limbs working in tandem. That's a
Mm.
big ask.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're cross-lateral, like you're Colin Cooper or James Adulhu, you're feeding the ball with a with your dominant hand,
Yeah.
non-dominant foot. It has to be easier. It has to be like. Um, so there's a practical advantage there straight away.
So yeah, so give me the names then of players who would be cross-lateral. You've named a couple there. Can you go through
Mm.
some that would jump out?
Oh, well, obviously I can't be naming any present Kerry lads because that. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I just like to specify as well. This is completely independent of Kerry. This is
Yeah,
Irish
yeah,
Research Council funded, and
yeah,
in
yeah,
nuance, this is anything. Um, you're James O'Donoghue, Colin Cooper, Declan O'Sullivan, uh, current Kerry lads. Um, I think Gavin White is. I think
yeah,
Thomas Sullivan, cornerback, is, and obviously David Clifford is. David Clifford certainly was.
yeah.
Um, There's a couple of others who would the evidence would indicate that they are, but I can't say it for sure.
Yeah, is Paddy
No,
ambidextrous when he writes, or
I
is
would
he?
say he's ambidextrous, but I don't think he's cross-lateral.
Yeah,
He's primarily left-handed, left-footed, even though he's relatively two-footed. Excuse me, relatively bilateral.
yeah, yeah.
He's a good example, actually. Like, yeah, yeah.
Mm. But
But
to explain the advantage, then, if you're a child and you're
mm,
right-handed, but you start kicking on your left foot, what's
mm.
the advantage? Can you kind of dig into that a little bit?
So if you're right-handed and you're kicking with your left foot, um, oh, sorry, yeah, if you're right-hand dominant, but then if well, what I would say is if you start kicking with your non-dominant foot,
Mm.
you're feeding the ball with a dominant hand.
Yeah,
So you'd ask a player. I've spoken to players about this at the start and coaches is that we need to really go back to basics and how we coach the non-dominant foot kicking action because we really are throwing them into the deep end. Before we introduce a ball, we need to get them comfortable stabilizing on both feet, pivoting off both sides. We need to introduce soccer style before we even introduce the drop. Okay, so that would be why I would say the drop is just easier for them because they're obviously using their dominant hand far more than the other child.
yeah, and it almost feels more natural
Mm.
to Shane Walsh and Clifford both do this when they're running at speed. They'll cross lateral solo the ball, and that's
Yeah,
kind of like
James, I don't know
when
who would have. I would have coached with Legion for a couple of years, and it was actually James I don't know in 2020 who said it to me. And James did sports science in UL.
yeah,
No, he's unbelievably two-footed, and that comes from you could argue the cross laterality, but I also know his father Dermot, who played for Kerry in the
mm,
'80s, did a fabulous job with him as well. He's off both feet; he's insane. But we were just doing a normal warming up solo thing, and he was dropping the ball from his right hand to his right, excuse me, his right hand to his left foot, and I was doing the usual thing with coach, and he said, "No, no, no, this goes against running mechanics to do it your way," and he's hundred
mm,
percent right.
yeah,
He's 100% right. So, is regards to Shane Walsh and Cross and Paddy Clifford soloing that way, I don't think that's I don't think that's a cross laterality thing. I honestly do believe because I spoke to Tomas O'Shea about it and Declan Sullivan.
yeah,
They used to also feed the ball from the opposite hand. So in Tomas's case, it was right hand. It was I think it was left hand to right foot, and in Declan's it was definitely right hand to left foot.
yeah,
And they felt they were able to generate more speed on the solo run going because
yeah,
and they're right. It is proper running mechanics to do that. So
yeah,
we really need to look at how we're coaching the solo. If a child is more comfortable that way, we have to let them at it. If they feel they're generating more pace, and you'll find actually lads will find their way in training and say, no, this feels more comfortable when I'm soloing the ball,
mm,
left hand to right foot or vice versa, and let them at it.
yeah, yeah. But the coaches will tell you left hand to left foot, right hand to right foot. Yeah. Are we behind other sports when you compare us to like basketball, soccer, even hurling? Are we less? Are we more one-sided than other sports in Gaelic
No,
football?
no. But can we put a pin in the hurling because it's really fascinating to me that one, in
Yeah.
case I forget it. Um, no, the soccer would show that that equivalent study that I cited at the start would have said that players are predominantly one-sided as well. A
Okay.
few very similar, I suppose, to our results, to be honest with you. Even though it was initially conducted in '98 World Cup in France, and the follow-up was in 2008, so some Premier League games were included there. Basketball, slightly different. They found that the higher up the ranks you went from amateur to semi-pro to NBA, players became a little bit more two-sided. However, the bilaterality of NBA players was very much skill dependent. So for your dribbling and passing skills, they were more two sided than they were for shooting. They were still very one sided for
Okay.
shooting in NBA style. Um, the hurling thing is fascinating to me because look again, I where I grew up in Kerry, a hurl is a weapon, so I'm a bit low to comment on it. But there is a culture in of hurling in Ireland where if you went to your Kilkennys or your Limerick or Cork, wherever, there's a culture of young boys and girls walking down the street with a hurl and a slitter.
Mm,
11 o'clock on a Wednesday, whatever it is. We don't have that in Gaelic football, other than O'Neill's.
mm,
So what you call, I suppose, informal practice seems to be more prevalent and cultural in hurling, and I like that about hurling. I really do. And I think if we go back to Gaelic football and how we coach soft skills and the non-dominant side specifically, I think there's a lot of room throughout the day. Because I would ask, how many players actually have an O'Neill's? People might throw their eyes to heaven. You'd be surprised how many don't have an O'Neill's.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
for a fact a certain inter-county team, senior level, a number of years ago in January, um, X amount of O'Neill's were bought for the panel.
right. To have.
Yeah,
I
throughout
remember
the day.
Paul Galvin. Paul Galvin. I don't know. I think he was taking a session with London footballers, or
Hmm.
else it could have been when he was with Wexford. But he asked them as well how many lads have a bag of footballs in the car, and like only a handful put them up. So that kind of follow on that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. to- yeah. So the hurling, that's interesting. And just going back to the point about like you mentioned James Donoghue's dad, and he would have been highly
Mm.
influential. And I
Yeah.
think you said before that the influence of the parents is actually greater than the coaches because the parents, if they're
Yeah,
encouraging that at home,
definitely the club coach would be prevalent as well, but the coach, definitely we found there's a big gap between parent club coach and development squad coach. Uh, it's not really been hit relative to the others. And then, but the parents, it is coming from the parents an awful lot. Um, and even if it's coming from the club coach, the reality is the contact time is such that even if the club coach is meeting them twice a week versus the parent hitting them, for want of a better word,
yeah,
meeting them every day. If that parent is very only encouraging, not giving out, just encouraging and hinting at it, I mean that's powerful.
mm,
Like if you go back to James again, his father would have been very, very encouraging, but made little competitions, fun competitions for his non-dominant side when he was younger that he didn't even realize he was practicing.
mm,
Um, so that's where the evidence we would have surveyed development squad players, male and female, around the country, and the influence of the parent was quite strong, followed by the club coach.
yeah,
Development squad coaches then were came in third.
yeah. And you've mentioned in the past you've talked about say the Ajax model or the Dutch football
Mm,
model where they will have I think is it like 30% of their players
mm,
coming through on a certain squad have to be left sided.
mm.
Is that something now that you think development squads should
Yeah,
prioritize a bit more?
yeah, 100%. For two reasons. Separate to my research, um, the reason they have it isn't actually anything to do with bilaterality that I know of. It's to open up the pitch as much as possible.
Right.
So, for instance, if in football, I don't really know what the point is in having tactics where you're making the pitch as wide as possible. If the first time um, a wing forward gets the ball, he has to cut in on his right.
Yeah.
What's the point in this, lads?
Yeah.
And he goes back towards where all the defenders are. So that's where that's one aspect of it, and obviously our research would point to the left-sided players being more two-sided anyway. Um, so for me, it's the two-pronged reason why. Excuse me. At club level, you have what you have. So let's be fair here. I'm not advocating an East German model at club football under 10 here. But if you have a choice at development squad level, I honestly do believe that you should try and keep left-sided players inside the system within reason. I really do. And first thing you should really be doing is profiling players when they come in the system. You'd be surprised. You'd be very, very surprised who doesn't know. Like you look at a well-established senior intercounty players, and do people really know what their dominant hand is for the hand pass and hop, their dominant foot for the solo?
Mm.
Fair enough, the kick pass, they'll know that, and the shooting. The other skills, they're just, in a lot of cases, they're making assumptions. And we should definitely not assume, based on one skill, what their limb dominance is for all other skills. It's very, very much skill dependent. And I think
Yeah.
that has repercussions as well for oppositional analysis. And analysts mightn't like to hear that, but you really shouldn't be just making assumptions on one skill. You should be analyzing all skills and then making your readings accordingly.
Yeah, so that's interesting. The tactical side of things, that
Mm.
if a player is, like, most teams are going to be predominantly right-footed players, so the ball is predominantly going to go into the 13 channel then
Yeah, yeah.
if they're kicking across the body. So then that should set up how a
Mm.
team defends, where they shift.
Mm. But this kind of blows my mind. And it people will say it to me, but well, Carl, like if players are predominantly one-sided and they're at one intercounty Division One, what difference does it make? Well, it does make a difference because number one, why is Shane Walsh and Morris Fitz and James Dunhu, these lads, why are they so um, well known and so well regarded? But also, before the next step, I would say to that is just because he's retained possession does not mean it was the right decision.
Mm.
By using your non-dominant side, there might have been a goal on. Just because you kick the ball over the bar with your dominant foot does not mean that it was the right decision. Maybe if you use your non-dominant hand, there was a goal. And then we go to the tactical implications. If you are a kicking team and you are predominantly one-sided, but also predominantly right-footed, every sweeper, every oppositional analysis, they will all set up blocking 13.
Yeah.
Or they should do. I don't really know why it wouldn't. Because it's going to go there. And that's why it's so important to have, even if they're one-sided, it's one of the reasons why it's important, in my belief, to have two to three left-footed players in the middle eight. Otherwise, everything is going to go into 13. And like the
Mm.
sweeper doesn't even have to work hard. All he has to do is stand in front of 13.
What about then pressure moments in games? Like, on your Twitter, like, you'll often highlight
Mm.
an incident where a player will turn down a shot that's actually
Yeah.
in a really decent scoring position. The big one that jumped out, like Liam Silk was the one last year in the All Ireland
Mm.
final. Like, Liam Silk comes from a club who Corofin, they all are trained
Yeah.
underage. They're probably one of the
100%.
best
Yeah.
clubs for 2 feet, and you would back him to take that shot on and score it
Mm.
on his non-dominant side. But
Mm.
then there's the pressure side of things when it comes into
Mm.
in a big game, and it's a natural thing for players not
Mm.
to want to take on that shot. But you touch on other ones, then
Mm.
people will remember the Pater Morgan one was a big one in the Ulster
Yeah.
final where he was on the edge of the small D.
Mm.
Sean Kelly last weekend had a chance as well.
Yeah.
So there's moments in games when the pressure comes on that players turn down that opportunity.
And I'd hate for a bit late for me now. Maybe it sounds like I'm trying to hang those lights out to dry. They're all fantastic footballers.
Mm,
The three of them alone, they really are. And I think the broader issue is I'm trying to bring to people's attention and is that the why and the repercussions of it. In each of those three cases, to the best of my memory, Sean Kelly was turned over, but the other two retained possession. But that doesn't
mm,
mean it was the right decision. Okay, so why is it like the Liam Silk one is fascinating because he kicked about 15 minutes in the All Ireland final last year. He kicked a point off his left, which was far more difficult.
mm.
So the thing that I think is fascinating to me is why is it that players will revert to their dominant side despite being proficient on their non-dominant side? Why is it they revert to their dominant side under times of extreme pressure? Now, this won't make the PhD because it's too much in its infancy. Um, but there is limited enough research, but there is research out there to say that it's an evolutionary thing, and it's down to our hunter gatherer days.
Right.
So that when we, in times of most extreme pressure or most extreme danger in our hunter gatherer days, we will revert to our dominant side, because that's the point of least resistance in our brain. Now,
Okay.
if my supervisor is looking at this, he'd be like, no, 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 don't put this. So
Yeah.
that will not make the PhD, just to clarify that. But there is research out there to suggest that. What I can say with certainty is that cognitively it is more difficult on our brain, you and me, to use our non-dominant side.
Okay. So if you're fatigued and
Correct.
you're in a high stress environment, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That is absolutely true. There is cognitive issues here as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just, I wanted to ask you about, I think you named Tyrone as the team in Division One who were
Mm.
the most cross-lateral or
that'd be relative. I know that came from Kerr, and he did a brilliant job. It
yeah,
there was about three counties, and there was very little between them. So what we did, to satisfy my own curiosity, um, because obviously you can't name these in academic studies. I ranked to satisfy my own curiosity the top 50
yeah.
most
I was going to ask you about
bilateral players, and just to see there was slightly more. So within that, if the starting point really is that there are no truly two-sided players, there is one. Uh, okay, but after that, there's a massive drop off after him.
that. Okay, so
Okay.
Shane Walsh is the one.
Alright. Um,
I,
no, Shane Walsh, in fairness, deserves a case study himself. That's all I'd say about
yeah,
him. He's an
yeah,
amazing, absolutely amazing. But after that, then there's a drop off, and a quite significant drop off. So you're talking in relative terms here. Uh, so I made a list of each county and how many players in the top 50 were from each county. And there was slightly more from Tyrone, but we're kind of marginal there.
yeah.
We
Um,
really are. We're quite marginal there.
yeah. Just on the coaching side of things, I'm really interested in
Mm,
and how you would suggest, um, say it could be a coach with an underage team or even an adult team, and he
mm.
wants to improve. They want to improve weak-sided kicking on that team. What do you suggest? Is it go drills into game based, then trying to encourage them to do in proper games, or is there a process that is kind of
Yeah.
best practice?
No, and this is a really fascinating thing. If I go back here to, I suppose, the honest conversation we need to have in GA is that if we want to develop two-sided players, if we don't want to develop two-sided players, we need to keep going, kind of in general, doing what we're doing.
Hmm.
Okay. But if we really want an honest conversation, we have to be honest and say what we're currently doing largely isn't working. Shane Walsh or your outliers are not evidence of a system working. Shane Walsh is evidence of Shane Walsh.
Yeah.
He obviously there's evidence to suggest he would be mixed-handed anyway. So I've heard through the grapevine that he writes with a particular hand, but picks up plays golf with the other hand. That's beyond
Okay.
elite football. Okay. Then you also have his primary school teacher, apparently, who was a big advocate of it. And then obviously you have Shane himself. Okay. But Shane is not evidence of it. An outlier is not evidence of a system working.
Mm.
So, um, yeah, in general, what we need to do is once a child or teenager or adult is in any way proficient in an isolated drill or a closed drill, they have to be moved on to small-sided games.
Yeah.
They have to, because otherwise, the key here is if I can really, really stress this, there's no doubt whatsoever the non-dominant side can be improved in the closed skill assessment. So if I start off in January with a skills assessment that's closed without a defender, and I work and practice for 6 months, I absolutely will improve. But unless I choose the non-dominant side in a key moment in a game, that's of no value to me. That's a circus act.
Right.
You know, that's your ability. Our To me, bilaterality, it's about using the appropriate limb or appropriate side in a certain situation. And what's quite subtle about Shane Walsh, in fairness to him, is that everyone spots the kicking the freeze off the ground with his non-dominant foot. Close contact, he will almost always use the appropriate hand for the hop, the hand pass, and the solo. To me, that's the appropriateness, which is the key to bilaterality,
Mm.
is using and choosing, not just that you're able to use it, choosing to use the appropriate side um, in the
Yeah.
appropriate situation. Are you going, for instance, to a more difficult angle? Are you going out to the corner flag to get onto your dominant foot? You know, that's going to catch up
Mm.
with you. Even if it goes over the first or second time, it will catch up with you. Are you
Yeah.
turning down a far easier chance on your non-dominant foot? So, if come back to your question, how do we need to raise awareness of this, the implications of it? We need to raise awareness of this amongst coaches that this is far deeper than dominant foot, we need to raise awareness about the importance of developing, because we kind of have an obsession with going straight to the foot. How about we go at the non-dominant hand as regards the hop and the hand pass?
Yeah, yeah. Because
Um,
that's a big thing actually, the hand pass, because
mm,
it definitely at intercounty level. I don't know if you've kind of
mm,
the same stats on that, but you would imagine intercounty players should be very comfortable on both. But I know from playing against some of them at club level that they're not as
mm,
well. They still have a dominant side. But I just wanted to ask you about, like, I've done that thing as well where you're practicing kicking against the wall, or standing
mm,
kicking or whatever, or in drills, and my left foot would have improved a lot. But when it
mm.
came down to game based situations in training, and definitely in games, I was still always go to my right side. So you're
Mm.
saying for a player to develop, they have to actually force themselves almost to go on the weaker side, even though the skill, it would feel uncomfortable. You might lose the ball,
Well,
but that's the only
absolutely
way.
will. It absolutely
Yeah,
will. But I mean, I think that's where skill acquisition, um, it's a relative grey area, and I think players and coaches lose their nerve
yeah,
because the results can be quite slow, very very slow, and you need a coach that will hold their nerve and say, Kevin, okay, that was dreadful, but I don't care because it's for the greater good.
yeah,
You got to have a coach that says aesthetically this looks horrendous, but that to me, surely that is the goal of training or practice.
mm,
You shouldn't be looking for a polished version. I didn't want, like Peter Shaw there and the Lavins had a um, interaction on Twitter last week. It was fascinating about how training is meant to be messy, and I
mm,
stayed over it. But I think this is really, to me, that's really relevant to the non-dominant side as well, because
mm,
for the non-dominant side, training should be messy, but you have to be as a coach willing to take that hit. But going back to your thing about how we develop it, we for children we need to go back to basics before we even introduce a ball. And like there's a list before we introduce a ball. I mean, we got to realize in many cases the ball is the final act. There's kinematical issues as well, and that would be in terms of when we're kicking off for non-dominant foot. There's more circular rotation. There's less shank um, speed, lower limb velocity, and so how do we address this? Um, we address it through the use of agility ladders, um, balance boards, single leg squats, and a very, very easy one is cone drills, where you have to pivot off both sides. Because
okay,
again, I'd almost guarantee that if you're doing shuttle runs, children and adults will tend to pivot off the same leg each time.
mm, yeah, definitely.
Um, if you go back to Son, the Spurs player,
Mm,
his goals ratio for Spurs is over 40% off his non-dominant foot. Now your Salahs and your Harry Kane's, Henry's would be approximately 15 to 18%. So what is it he's doing? His father in South Korea was he ran a nursery, not a nursery, soccer academy, excuse me.
yeah,
And his obsession really was the non-dominant side, and but he felt that you needed to use the non-dominant side 60% more than the dominant side. Um, and he also said, and I completely agree with the following: it has to be a lifestyle thing where you're brushing your teeth, you're feeding yourself, you're tying your shoelace, non-dominant side first.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
So it's
about it's about raising awareness of it because let's break it down. Forget about any research. You use your dominant side for everything during the day, and you go to training, and the coach, if he does, says right, everybody non-dominant side for 10 minutes at the end of training. I don't see how that could possibly tally. I'm not saying it's useless. Of course, it's not useless, but that's a big gap to bridge in 10 minutes.
yeah, yeah.
You
That
know.
makes sense. What, like, just a few kind of final ones for you. What's the feedback when, like, with coaches? I'm sure you're talking to coaches the whole time, from intercounty
Mm,
level right down to club, under tens or whatever. What's the
mm.
feedback been like? Do they agree with you? Are they kind of asking about what should I do? Is there
Yeah,
still a
to be
kind of,
fair, yeah. I think sometimes there's a mixture. Some would be skeptical, Uh, I think there's that of that with academia anyway. Um, and to be fair, then there's other coaches quite hungry to improve, and it's the how. Um, and if I can say anything to them, it's patience. Skill acquisition is about patience here. And if we are to go after this, I just think we need to change how we look at it, how we frame it, and it has to be a three-pronged approach. Club coaches, excuse me, parents, club coaches, and development squad coaches. And the reaction, a lot of people are interested, especially in the cross-laterality, the left-sided players, your James O'Donoghue, your Diego Maradona, what have they got in common?
Mm.
But cross-laterality isn't something you can train.
Yeah,
Cross-laterality is something you're born with. Your non-dominant side is something you can train and improve and evolve. Um, so yeah, it's been mixed. It's been mixed. It's a frustration would be when people would say, "Well, if players at Division One are one-sided or primarily one-sided, what difference does it make anyway?" And I kind of would be a bit defensive about that and say, "Well, what's the difference? What's the point in doing anything then? What's the point
yeah,
in training? Just give them a jersey, off you go."
yeah,
Again, retention of a ball does not mean it was the right decision. We and it's it quite it we need metrics, better metrics. It's when I was in Finland actually. There was a brilliant guy, Damien Farrow. He's Professor Damien Farrow. He works with AFL Australia, and he's doing a lot of work at the moment on how we measure decision making in the AFL and other sports. And it's quite a subtle thing. How do you measure decision making? Because as I said to him, like, if I pass the ball to you, Kevin, and we retain possession, that doesn't mean that it was the right decision.
mm.
You know. So that really goes to the non-dominant side, in my view, is that retention of the ball via the dominant side does not mean it was the right decision, and we
Yeah,
need to look beyond that. Look for the consequences, not just of the ball, the player in position, but look for the consequences for the runner and for the tactics as a whole,
mm.
um, and change that conversation, change that narrative.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you,
Mm,
you might not even have any, you probably don't have data on this, but like
mm,
if a 12-year-old came to you and said, "What's the best thing I can do now to play inter-county?" Like if they become really strong on both feet,
mm.
does that increase the likelihood exponentially versus try and get stronger, fitter, faster, all that kind of thing when you're in your teens? Does that, do
I
you think?
definitely, anything I have would be anecdotal. I don't have that. I do know, to be fair, Kevin Murray and Ed Collin in Cork, and I'm glad I've referenced this actually. They did do a study on rebel old players, and they found that the players who went from Cork under 16 to Cork minor, there was significant correlation between the players who were more two-handed.
Okay.
Um, so, what I would say anecdotally is that if you are one-sided, you better have a lot of strength and a lot of pace and a lot of power to get yourself out of that situation.
Mm,
You really are. You're cutting down your options so much. I mean, why would you willingly cut off half your body
mm,
when it's the one thing? Height can't be adjusted. Pace you can adjust to a certain extent, but you know yourself. Um, the non-dominant side can be adjusted. It is malleable if
mm.
people go at it properly. But
Just a very last one.
mm,
Sorry, come on,
no,
finish
no,
that
no.
point.
Was it? No, sorry. No.
I was going to ask you about, just to finish up, how is all this
Mm.
research and all the hours that you've spent coding games and all that kind of thing, how has that affected how you watch games and even in your day-to-day life? Do
There's
you
no
back to your
enjoyment.
weak side more?
There's no enjoyment in it. Um, I was watching a certain game last weekend. It wasn't the Dublin Galway game. I really enjoyed that one. I was watching another game and I was roaring at the television. Why, like I said, why have you stood out there getting wit when the first thing you would do repeatedly, not
Yeah.
just once, is go on a solo run by turning back inside? I just blows my mind. And also other things about how predictable that certain team is, in terms of all their right footers out the middle, eight, every kick pass was going into number 13. So you're right to ask that. It massively reduces my enjoyment.
Mm.
Um, and this goes back to the awareness. I don't know, are they aware of this stuff? I'm sure some are, no question, but I don't think so. Others are, and you'd be
Yeah.
surprised how many people aren't. And I think my friends actually be happier when I'm finished this bloody thing than me, because
Mm.
I think they want to get back to normality as well in terms of listening to other stuff. But yeah, yeah, I think if we can just change the dial, um, and move the conversation on, and raise awareness of the implications of this beyond the player
Mm.
in possession, and raise awareness of how difficult it is to go after the non-dominant side. Um, it isn't an easy fix, and it isn't a short-term fix. Um, but I think people, coaches, players, parents, they need to hold their nerve, because it can be done. It absolutely can be done. Look, I see a guy, and he's not related to me. Just specify that. There's a guy, Karol Dillon. He played under Kerry under 20 last year. He was injured. He was Munster Player of the Year last year,
Mm.
and he would have been with Kerry again this year. He pulled his hamstring in January. He was UCC and Sigerson, and I just saw the work he would have done with his father as a child, teenager. Phenomenal amount of work, but he is so bilateral, um, with all skills, not
Mm.
just off the feet. I see Eddie Healy. He's with Kerry under 20s last 2 years. Was with the Kerry seniors in January and February. He could hardly kick the ball off his left foot when he was 14 years of age. Just pure determination and doggedness. And he's kicking points for fun from midfield off his left. So they're anecdotal stories, but it's just that they live beside me and I see firsthand.
Yeah.
It's not sexy how they did it. It's not like it's there's no secrets. I'm sorry, like there's no secrets. It's just pure hours and hard work how they did it, and
Mm.
perseverance, and not being afraid to look stupid initially when aesthetically it may have not looked great.
Yeah, and maybe there's a thing as well where, kids are spending less time outside just messing around with the football and things like that. I just wonder, as a very final
Mm.
point, and it doesn't have to be a long answer, but do you think in 5 to 10 years, will we have more two-sided players in Gaelic football or less, just based on coaching and anecdotes and the data that you've been looking at as well? Is it trending in one direction over the other?
Can't say for a fact it's trending. My gut is that we'll have less because we seem
Yeah.
to be focusing more and more and more on other areas. And I'm not in any way saying that diet isn't important. Of course it is. And there are some experts out there that are brilliant. Or that sleep isn't important, or that S&C isn't important. Of course they all are. But the one thing I would say, and I have a kind of, I suppose, a concern, is that there are only so many hours in the day, and ball skills seem to be the one that it seems to be the area that's constantly suffering.
Mm.
Um, so that would definitely be a concern. I do know from interviewing a couple of players for the for yeah a few of the 15 players, they said they almost preferred being county minor, where you'd rock up the training 45 minutes beforehand, get a bag of footballs, kick around.
Yeah.
Whereas now they're rocking up the train an hour and a half before, and it's just band work, it's activation work, and it's like then 5 minutes of a ball. And you're thinking, I'm not in any way saying there's S&Cs roaring at this. I am not in any way saying what you do or whatever isn't important. Of course it is. But I don't. But I would also say I don't believe that the actual fundamentals of the game should suffer either.
Yeah.
And it kind of concerns me, not or saddens me, I suppose, a little bit if players are able to run so well for 70 minutes, but can't kick the ball out over the bar off their dominant side from 21 yards out. I know I sound like an old fogey there, but at the same time, if efficiency is one of our goals here, um, surely that's a concern. But that's another day's work. But
Yeah.
my gut, sorry, the long-winded way of saying my gut, and I hope I'm wrong, is that we'll become less two-sided.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree
I
with
think
that.
because I think as well, like if you go back to the story, I would have said about that culture of bringing hurdles around the place, going to the shop. do we really have that culture? Even less now of bringing that O'Neill's down to the shop as you're hopping and soloing and going down to the shop. Do
Mm.
we have that culture inside in the house on a darkened December of O'Neill's and breaking lights and breaking windows and breaking cutlery, which is all part of growing up in my eyes. Um, do we have that? I less and less. I would argue less and less, and that you're sitting down watching home and away. You're sitting down watching whatever the soccer, and you're kicking, and that O'Neill's is in it. It's part of you. It's part of your your makeup. Look at all those touches. If you're talking about the amount of touches that you can get during the day, separate to team training, um, I'd hate to think we'll lose that. And I think that's where we go back to the parental influences as well of your Shane Walsh's or your Cormac Dillons or whoever the case may be. If you have parents not giving out, but you're encouraging it, encouraging free play, having an O'Neill's or a couple of O'Neill's footballs in the house, um, that's powerful as well.
Yeah.
And if you have a parent who's, I'm not saying they have to be really good coaches or anything of that nature, who is aware of the importance of the non-dominant side, they're going to hint at it because the child will be like, "Look at me, I'm able to do this," and then he'll give a nudge and say, "Try it out for weeks." I know,
Mm.
and and children are competitive. We don't have to make them competitive; they're competitive. So yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sorry, one final thing I'd say as well is little tip would be don't be a slave in some cases to proper technique. And I've changed my to perfect technique with the non-dominant side. What I would say to the parent is film them with your phone with their dominant side and get the child to look, excuse me, and then film them on your phone with the non-dominant side and get the child to look.
Mm.
Those two little 3-4 second clips off both sides will be unbelievably illustrative to the child and they'll see.
Mm.
And they'll try and mirror. So what we should do there is try and get them to mirror the dominant side.
Mm. But yeah, I think I remember David Clifford saying actually before that you don't have to be perfect on your non-dominant side as well. Once your technique can
Mm,
put the ball over the bar, or whatever it is,
right.
it doesn't have to be perfect and look the same.
Yeah.
But no, listen, Carl, that was top
Mm,
class. Now that was so fascinating, and there's another hour I could go into on all the different bits that
yeah.
you touched on there. But look, thanks a million for coming on there. I think as a player, as a coach, whoever's listening, they'll get so much from that,
Mm,
and um, I hope, I think what the work you're doing as well will hopefully encourage coaches to realize how important this side of things is. So
mm,
how important it is. So hopefully we can start trending in the right direction as well in terms of getting players more two sided. But the cross lateral stuff as well is just fascinating as well. So thanks a million for coming on and best of luck with the rest of the PhD.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Cheers, bud. All right.